the eye of the world, a pool of pure Saidin, and the first stand against the shadow. Good evening, and welcome to the Sleep to Lore series. Tonight, we will talk about the final events of the Eye of the World, specifically the terrifying journey through the Great Blight and the ancient secrets hidden at the very edge of the world. This story covers the transition from the safety of the borderlands into the land of the Dark One, the encounter with the last of the Nim, and the discovery of the Eye. If you would like to support this channel, please subscribe or leave a comment, as it helps me continue telling these stories. Before we begin, I have a simple question for you to answer in the comments. If you were a channeler in this world, would you choose to bond a warder to protect you, even if it meant feeling their pain? Let me know what you think below. Now lie back and relax as we begin our journey. Act 1. The Rot of the Seven Towers. The journey began with a departure from the fortress city of Faldara. The group had rested briefly, but the urgency of their mission pulled them north. They rode out under the banner of the Shirnarans for a short distance, but soon they were alone. The landscape of the borderlands was harsh and cold. It was winter here, and the wind bit through cloaks and coats. The trees were bare, and the ground was hard with frost. But as they rode further north, the air began to change. It was a subtle shift at first. The biting cold of the winter wind began to fade. It was not replaced by the warmth of a normal spring sun, but by something heavy and humid. The further they rode, the warmer it became. This was unnatural heat. It was the heat of a swamp or a fever. The crisp, clean air of Shirnar was left behind, and a new smell drifted on the stagnant breeze. It smelled of rotting vegetation and old copper. It smelled of sweetness that had gone bad. They were crossing the border into the Great Blight. There was no wall here. There were no fences or markers to show where the lands of men ended and the lands of the shadow began. The change happened in the soil and the plants. The trees of the borderlands gave way to the twisted growth of the blight. The parties slowed their horses as the forest thickened around them. The trees here did not look like normal wood. They looked swollen and bruised. The bark was not rough and brown, but pale and grey, and sometimes slick with moisture that looked like oil. The leaves were not green. They were dark shades of purple and black and yellow. They did not rustle in the wind because there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. It sat on them like a heavy blanket. The silence was the first thing they noticed. In a normal forest, you hear birds or insects or the sound of small animals moving in the brush. Here there was nothing. It was a silence that felt like it was waiting for something. Lan Mandragoran took the lead. The warder was always alert, but here in the Blight, he was different. He was like a wolf on a scent. His sword was loose in its scabbard, and his eyes did not stop moving. He watched the trees and the shadows beneath them. Moiraine rode beside him, her face calm but her eyes focused. The rest of the group from Emond's field rode close together. The heat was making them sweat under their wool cloaks, but they were afraid to take them off. The atmosphere was oppressive. It felt as if eyes were watching them from every shadow. The trees seemed to lean toward them as they passed. Branches hung low like grasping fingers. As they moved deeper into this rotting forest, Lan began to speak quietly. He did not speak often, but here the land held memories for him. He pointed out landmarks that were not visible to the others. He spoke of a kingdom that once stood here. This was not always the Blight. Once this land was a proud nation called Malkia. It was a land of lakes and towers. It was known as the land of the Golden Crane. Lan explained that the corruption of the Dark One had swallowed it up. It happened slowly at first, and then all at once. The tragedy of Malkia was not just about losing land, it was about betrayal. Lan told them of the time before the fall. He spoke of the 7 towers which were the heart of the kingdom. They were beautiful structures that glittered in the sun. Now they were broken and lost somewhere in this endless rot. The story of Malkia is a sad one. It is a story of a king named Alakir and his queen Eliana. They were good rulers. They fought the shadow every day because Malkia was the shield of the north. But the shadow is patient. There was a man named Cowin Gemelan. He was a hero to the people. They called him Cowin Fairheart because they thought he was noble. But his heart had turned to the shadow. He wanted power, and he made a deal with the Dark One. He betrayed his people. He pulled back his soldiers when the Trollocs attacked. He left gaps in the defenses. Because of him, the armies of the shadow poured into Malkia. The golden crane banner was trampled in the mud. Lan told this story without emotion, but the others could feel the weight of it. He was the son of that king and queen. He was the baby they saved. When the end was certain and the 7 towers were burning, they did not try to save themselves. They took their infant son and gave him to 5 swordsmen. These were the best fighters in the kingdom. They commanded these men to take the baby to Shi'enar to safety. Then the king and queen returned to the battle. They died fighting to buy time for their son to escape. As Lan spoke, the group looked around at the twisted trees and the black mud. It was hard to imagine that this was once a beautiful country with blue lakes and white towers. Now it was a graveyard. The lakes were still here, but they were choked with weeds and slime. The water was black and motionless. Nothing could drink from it and live. The environment of the Blight was hostile in every way. It was not just the monsters that were dangerous. The land itself tried to kill you. Moiraine warned them not to touch anything. She pointed to a patch of flowers that looked like red trumpets. They were bright and colourful in the gloom, but inside the petals there were tiny teeth. If a bird or a small animal landed on them, the flower would snap shut. Moiraine explained that even a small scratch from a branch could fester and kill a man in hours. The sap of the trees was acid. The moss that hung from the branches was full of parasites. The boys from the 2 rivers looked at the plants with horror. In their home, nature was a friend. It gave them crops and wood and shade. Here, nature was a weapon. They rode past a tree that looked like a man. It had 4 limbs and a trunk that looked like a torso. The bark was smooth and pale. It looked like a person trapped in wood, screaming silently. Rand al'Thor felt a shiver go down his spine. He tried not to look at it, but he felt the tree watching him. The Blight played tricks on the mind. You would see movement in the corner of your eye, but when you turned, nothing was there. You would hear a whisper, but it was just the shifting of dead leaves. The heat made them tired. It drained their energy. Their water skins were warm and the water tasted flat. They wanted to stop and rest, but Lan kept them moving. To stop in the Blight was to invite death. As the day wore on, the light began to fade. In the Blight, there was no true sunset. The grey sky just turned a darker shade of grey, and then black. The shadows stretched out and connected until everything was darkness. They had to make camp. This was a terrifying prospect. Sleeping in the open in the Blight seemed like madness. Lan found a small clearing on a rise of ground. The ground was rocky here and there were fewer plants. He and Moiraine set wards around the camp. Moiraine used the one power to create a barrier that would hide them and protect them. She traced a line in the dirt and spoke words they did not understand. The air shimmered for a moment and then settled. Inside the line they were safe for now. Outside the line, the Blight continued its hungry watch. They ate a cold meal. No one wanted to light a fire. A fire would be a beacon in the dark. Even with the wards, they did not want to attract attention. They sat close together eating hard bread and dried meat. The conversation was low. They asked Lan more about the Blight. He told them about the creatures that lived here. He spoke of Trollocs and Myrddraal, of course, but there were worse things. There were things that had been here since the age of legends, creatures that were made in vats by the Forsaken. He spoke of the Drachkar with their pale wings and their song that hypnotized prey. He spoke of the worms. The mention of worms made the group uneasy. They had heard stories of worms in the garden back home, small pink things that were good for fishing. These were not those worms. Lan described them as massive creatures that lived deep in the Blight. They were called Jumara in the old tongue. They burrowed through the earth and could swallow a horse whole. They were blind, but they could sense vibration. They were driven by hunger that never ended. In the high passes of the Blight, they were the apex predators. Even Trollocs feared them. The only thing that stopped a worm was death. As the night deepened, the sounds of the Blight changed. The silence of the day was replaced by a chorus of clicks and rustles. Things were hunting in the dark. They could hear snapping branches and wet tearing sounds. Sometimes a scream would cut through the air. It sounded human, but they knew it was not. It was some animal dying in the grip of a predator. Ran tried to sleep, but his mind was racing. He thought about the stories of the Eye of the World. They were going there to stop the Dark One from blinding the world. It seemed like an impossible task. They were just village boys and a girl. What could they do against the shadow? He touched the hilt of his sword. It gave him a small amount of comfort. The next morning, the heat was even worse. A red sun struggled to pierce the grey clouds. The air was so thick you could almost chew it. They mounted their horses and continued north. The landscape became more broken. They were climbing into the foothills of the Mountains of Doom. These mountains marked the end of the world. Beyond them lay the Pit of Doom itself. The ground became steep and rocky. The trees became smaller and more twisted. They were like gnarled hands clawing at the sky. Lan stopped suddenly. He held up a hand. The group froze. Moiraine rode up beside him. They whispered to each other. Lan pointed to the ground. There were tracks in the soft mud. They were not Trolloc tracks. They were hoof prints, but they were unshod, and they were small. Lan said they were the tracks of a deer or a goat that had been chased. But what chased it left no tracks. It just left a trailer of crushed grass and slime. Lan said it was a pack of dark hounds. The news chilled them. Dark hounds were legendary monsters. They were the hounds of the shadow. They did not stop until they caught their prey. If they were in the area, the group had to move fast. They pushed the horses harder. The terrain was difficult, but they could not slow down. They had to reach the high passes before nightfall. The lore of the Seven Towers felt heavy here. They passed ruins of stone. These were the remains of watchtowers that once guarded the kingdom. Now they were piles of grey rubble covered in black vines. It was a reminder that everything man built could be destroyed. The golden crane had flown here once. Now only vultures flew. The party saw a flock of ravens watching them from a dead tree. The birds did not move. Their black eyes followed the riders. Ravens were the eyes of the Dark One. Moiraine knew this. She did not look at them, but she urged her horse faster. The path led them along the edge of a precipice. Below them was a canyon filled with mist. The mist swirled and moved as if it was alive. Strange shapes formed in the fog. It was easy to imagine faces screaming in the mist. The drop was sheer. One slip and a horse would fall to its death. They rode single file. The horses were nervous. They could smell the wrongness of the place. They rolled their eyes and tossed their heads. The riders had to use all their skill to keep them calm. As they climbed higher, the vegetation changed again. The large trees disappeared. Now there were only scrub bushes and thorn vines. The thorns were as long as a finger and sharp as needles. They were black and shiny. If a horse brushed against them, the skin would swell and burn. The ground was rock and shale. It was slippery. The heat did not fade with the altitude. It seemed to come from the rocks themselves. It was a dry, dusty heat now. Their mouths were dry. The water in the skins was almost gone. They had to ration it. Lan guided them toward a narrow pass in the mountains. He said it was the only way through. It was called the Pass of the Seven. It was named after the 7 towers. It was a treacherous path that wound through the peaks. As they approached the entrance to the pass, they heard a sound that stopped their hearts. It was a low rumble. It vibrated in their chests. It sounded like the earth itself was growling. Lan's face went pale. He knew that sound. It was the worms. They were not deep in the Blight anymore. They were hunting near the pass. The rumble grew louder. It was coming from behind them and to the sides. The worms were closing in. They could not see them yet, but they could see the trees shaking in the distance. Great clouds of dust rose into the air. The worms were moving through the earth like fish through water. They were coming fast. Moiraine shouted for them to ride. There was no time for stealth now. They had to outrun the monsters. The horses bolted. They could feel the fear of their riders. They galloped up the rocky slope. Hooves sparked on the stone. The noise of the pursuit got closer. Suddenly the ground to their left exploded. A massive head burst from the earth. It was blind and pale. It had a mouth that was nothing but a ring of teeth. It was huge. It was the size of a carriage. The worm screamed a high, piercing sound that made their ears ring. It lunged at them. Lan spun his horse and slashed at it with his sword. The blade sparked against the creature's hide. It was like striking stone. The worm recoiled, but only for a second. It was confused by the pain. This gave them a moment. They spurred their horses past it. More rumbles came from the right. Another worm burst out of the ground ahead of them. They were being herded. The creatures were working together. Moiraine raised her staff. She threw a ball of fire at the second worm. The fire exploded against its face. The creature thrashed and burned. The smell of burning meat filled the air. It was a sickly, sweet smell. The path ahead was clear for a moment. They raced through the gap. The pass was just ahead. It was a narrow crack in the mountain wall. If they could get inside, the worms might not be able to follow. The worms were too big for the narrowest parts of the pass. They reached the entrance and galloped inside. The walls of the pass rose up high on both sides. The sky was just a sliver of grey above them. The air in the pass was cooler. The sound of the worms faded slightly, but they could still hear them screaming in frustration outside. They did not stop. They rode deep into the mountain. The path twisted and turned. It was dark here. The shadows were absolute. They had to trust the horses. After what felt like hours, the path began to widen again. They were coming out the other side, but the other side was not safety. It was the heart of the Blight. Here, the corruption was absolute. The ground was blistered and red. The sky was a boiling mass of black clouds. Thunder rolled constantly, but there was no rain. Lightning flashed red and green. This was the landscape of a nightmare. They were close to the eye now, but they were also close to the army of the Dark One. Lan signaled for a halt. They needed to rest the horses or they would die. The animals were foaming with sweat. Their sides heaved. The riders were exhausted too. They slid from their saddles and leaned against the rock walls. While they rested, Lan spoke again of the golden crane. He did it to distract them from the fear. He told them about the code of the Malkieri. They had a saying, "Death is lighter than a feather duty, heavier than a mountain." He explained that his duty was to fight the shadow until he died. He had no kingdom to rule. He had no people to lead. He was a king without a crown. All he had was his sword and his war against the Dark One. He looked at Nynaeve as he spoke. There was a sadness in his eyes. He knew he could offer her nothing but a widow's mourning dress. The tragedy of his life was that he could not love without hurting the one he loved. His war would eventually kill him. That was the fate of the lords of Malkia. The respite was short. The ground began to tremble again. The worms had found a way around or over the mountain. Or perhaps there were more worms here. The hunt was back on. They mounted up. The horses groaned but obeyed. They rode out onto the blistered plain. The scenery was madness. Rocks floated in the air. Fire erupted from cracks in the ground. The laws of physics were breaking down here. This was what happened when the Dark One touched the world. Reality unraveled. They saw the worms coming from the sides. There were 3 of them this time. They were massive. They moved with terrifying speed. They were cutting off the escape. Ahead of them was a wall of fog. It was not like the mist in the canyon. This was a solid wall of green mist. It stretched from the ground to the sky. It looked unnatural even for this place. Moiraine pointed to it. She shouted that they had to reach the fog. It was their only hope. The worms were closing in. Their mouths were open, ready to swallow. The ground shook so hard the horses stumbled. Rand looked at the fog. It looked dangerous, but the worms were death certain. He kicked his heels into his horse. They galloped toward the green wall. The worm closest to them lunged. Its teeth snapped just inches from the tail of the last horse. They could smell its breath. It smelled of old graves. They hit the fog bank at full speed. They expected to hit a wall or fall off a cliff. Instead, they felt a sudden sensation of cold. The noise of the worms cut off instantly. The red lightning and the thunder vanished. The smell of rot disappeared. They were blinded by the white mist for a moment. They pulled the horses to a halt. They were breathing hard. They waited for the worms to burst through the fog behind them, but nothing came. There was silence. But it was not the predatory silence of the Blight. It was a peaceful silence. Slowly the mist began to thin. They blinked their eyes. They could not believe what they were seeing. The ground beneath the hooves was not blistered rock. It was soft green grass. It was thick and lush. The air was not hot and humid. It was cool and fresh. It smelled of wildflowers and clean earth. Above them the sky was blue. A gentle yellow sun shone down. They heard the sound of birds singing. Real birds, thrushes and larks. They looked around in amazement. Just seconds ago they were in hell. Now they were in a garden. The trees were tall and healthy oaks and elms. There were butterflies dancing in the air. They had found the sanctuary. This was the place the Green Man guarded. It was a remnant of the Age of Legends, a piece of the world as it was before the Dark One touched it. The contrast was shocking. The boys slid off their horses and touched the grass. It felt real. They laughed with relief. The terror of the Blight seemed far away, even though it was just on the other side of the mist. Lan sheathed his sword. Even he looked relieved. Moiraine smoothed her dress. She looked tired, but satisfied. They had made it, but they were not alone here. As they walked deeper into the garden, they saw a figure waiting for them. It stood under a great oak tree. At first it looked like part of the tree. It was huge, much taller than a man. It was broad and powerful, but it was not made of flesh and bone. It was made of vines and leaves and bark. It had a face, but the skin was like green leather. Its hair was grass. Its eyes were like hazelnuts. Birds perched on its shoulders. This was Someshta, the Green Man. He was the last of the Nim. We will pause here for a moment to understand what the Nim were. To understand the Green Man, we must look back to the Age of Legends. This was 3,000 years ago. In that time, the world was a paradise. Channelers, both male and female, worked together. They did not use the one power for war because there was no war. They used it to grow things. They used it to build. The Nim were artificial constructs. They were created by the Aes Sedai to help with agriculture. They were living gardens. They had a connection to the life of the earth that even Aes Sedai did not have. They worked alongside the Ogier and the Darshain Aiel. They participated in the singing. This was a ritual where they would sing to the crops, and the crops would grow perfectly without blight or disease. Someshta was the last one left. He had survived the war of power. He had survived the breaking of the world. While the world was torn apart and mountains were raised and seas were sunk, he stood guard here. He was placed here for a purpose. He was the guardian of the Eye. For 3,000 years he had waited. He was lonely. His kind were all dead. The Ogier had forgotten him or thought he was a myth. The Aiel had changed and forgotten the song. He was a relic of a better time, but he held his post. His life force maintained this sanctuary. As long as he lived, this bubble of spring would exist inside the blight, but he was old. You could see it in the brown leaves mixed with the green. You could hear it in his voice, which sounded like dry branches rubbing together. He welcomed them. He knew why they were there. He called them children of the dragon. He looked at Moiraine and recognized the Aes Sedai ring. He looked at the boys and sensed the Ta'veren nature in them. He looked at Loyal, the Ogier, who was traveling with them, and he smiled. A sad smile. He called Loyal little brother. He touched Loyal's head, and Loyal trembled. For an Ogier to meet a Nim was like meeting a god of nature. It was a connection to their lost history. Someshta led them through the garden. The peace here was profound, but it was also fragile. They could feel that the blight was pressing against the edges of the sanctuary. The Green Man was tired. Fighting the encroachment of the Dark One took all his strength. He led them to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was the object of their quest, the Eye of the World. It was a pool, but it was not water. The surface was smooth as glass. It was shaped like an oval. The substance inside was clear, but it seemed to hold light within it. It did not reflect the sky. It had its own depth. Moiraine explained what it was. It was pure Saidin, the male half of the true source. During the breaking, when the Dark One tainted Saidin, all male channelers went mad. They destroyed the world. But a group of male and female Aes Sedai worked together to create this pool. They cleansed a portion of the power. They sacrificed their lives to make it. They died so that this pool would exist pure and clean. It was a battery of power waiting for the Dragon Reborn. It was hidden here so the Dark One could not dirty it. The party stood at the edge of the pool. They looked down into the liquid light. At the bottom, they could see shapes. There were things hidden under the Saidin. A crystal chest, a silver horn, a banner. These were the tools of the dragon. But they could not reach them. Only the one power could touch the pool. Just as they were absorbing the magnitude of this discovery, the peace of the sanctuary was shattered. The ground shook, not from worms this time. The white fog at the edge of the garden turned black. Two figures stepped through the mist. They did not look like Trollocs or Fades. They looked like men, but they were ancient. Their clothes were rags of a style that had not been worn for thousands of years. Their skin was dry and pulled tight over their skulls. One of them wore a mask of leather over his face. The other was withered and decrepit. These were the Forsaken, Aginor and Balthamel. They had been trapped near the surface of the Dark One's prison for 3,000 years. They were close to the world, so time had touched them. They had rotted while they were sealed away. But now they were free. They had followed the boys. They had tracked the Ta'veren Pool. They walked into the sanctuary with arrogance. The green man stepped forward to stop them. He raised his vine-covered arms. He was a creature of peace, but he was also a guardian. He would not let the shadow touch the eye. The arrival of the Forsaken marked the end of the safety. The illusion of the garden began to flicker. The sky turned grey. The birds stopped singing. The final confrontation had begun. This was the moment the entire book had been building toward. The farm boys from the two rivers were standing face to face with the legends of the shadow. The monsters that parents used to scare children were real, and they were standing 10 paces away. Aginor laughed, and the sound was like stones grinding in a grave. He could smell the power in the pool. He wanted it. He had been starved of the one power for 3 millennia. He was hungry. And he looked at Rand. He looked at him with recognition. He knew what Rand was, even if Rand did not fully know himself yet. The stage was set for the first stand against the shadow. Act 1 ends here at the precipice of battle. The journey through the rot of the 7 towers and the chase of the worms brought them to this sanctuary. But the sanctuary has been breached. The ancient history of Malkia and the Nim has set the stage for a conflict that is both physical and magical. As we move to the next part, we will see the unleashing of power that has not been seen since the breaking of the world. Part 2, the last sanctuary of the Nim. The silence that fell over the sanctuary was heavy. It was not the peaceful silence of the garden that they had enjoyed just moments before. It was a suffocating silence. The air seemed to grow cold even though the sun was still shining. The birds had vanished into the trees. The butterflies were gone. The presence of the two Forsaken was like a physical weight pressing down on everyone. It made it hard to breathe. It felt as if the air had turned to water and they were drowning. Rand looked at the two figures standing at the edge of the clearing. They were nightmares come to life. The one on the left was Balthamel. He was a terrifying sight. He wore a mask made of leather. It covered his entire face. There were no holes for eyes. There was no hole for a mouth or a nose. It was just a smooth, blank surface of polished leather. It looked like an egg. He wore heavy clothing also made of leather that covered every inch of his skin. He wore gloves and high boots. It was as if he was afraid to let the air touch him. Or perhaps he was hiding what was underneath. He did not stand still. He moved with a strange, jerky energy. He tilted his head this way and that as if he was sniffing the air. He was looking at the women. Even without eyes, you could feel his gaze crawling over Moiraine and Nynaeve and Egwene. It was a feeling of hunger and cruelty. The other one was Aginor. He was even worse in a different way. He did not hide his face. He looked like a man who had been dead for a month, but was still walking. His skin was the color of old parchment. It was pulled so tight over his bones that you could see the shape of his skull perfectly. His lips were pulled back in a permanent grimace, showing teeth that were brown and broken. His eyes were sunken deep into their sockets. They were dark pits with a tiny spark of light deep inside. He stooped when he stood. His hands were like claws. He leaned on a gnarled staff made of black wood. He looked incredibly old, older than the mountains, older than the stone. He looked like he was made of dust, held together by hate. The green man stood between the group and the Forsaken. Someshta was huge and powerful. He was the force of life itself. But against these two he looked vulnerable. The vines on his body seemed to tremble. The flowers on his shoulders closed their petals tight. He knew what these men were. He remembered them from the time before the breaking. He remembered when they were men named Aginor and Balthamel, before they gave their souls to the Dark One. He remembered the betrayal. Someshta spoke. His voice was like the creaking of a great tree in a storm. He told them they were not welcome here. He told them this place was forbidden to the shadow. He stood his ground. He was the last Nim. His purpose was to guard. He would not step aside. Aginor laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. He spoke to the green man with contempt. He called him a weed. He mocked him. He said that the Nim were always weak. He said they were made for gardening, not for fighting. He said that the time of the Nim was over. He said he would pull Someshta up by the roots and burn him. The boys clutched their swords. Their hands were sweating. What could a sword do against the Forsaken? These were men who could channel the One Power with a strength that could break the world. They were the strongest channelers in history. Moiraine was an Aes Sedai, but she was nothing compared to them. She knew it too. Her face was pale. She held her staff tightly. She stepped forward, placing herself between the boys and the monsters. She was ready to die to buy them time. Balthamel stepped forward. He did not speak. He just moved. He raised a gloved hand. He made a gesture. A wind picked up, but it was not a normal wind. It was a wind of rot. The grass at his feet turned brown and crumbled to dust. The flowers near him wilted and died in seconds. The corruption of the blight was flowing out of him. He was a walking disease. He moved toward the green man. The green man did not retreat. He raised his massive arms. The ground shook. Roots burst from the earth around Balthamel's feet. Thick roots as hard as iron. They wrapped around the Forsaken's legs. They tried to hold him. They tried to crush him. But Balthamel just flicked his hand. The roots turned black. They rotted instantly and fell apart like wet paper. He kept walking. He reached out and grabbed the green man. It was a horrifying moment. The leather glove touched the living vines of Someshta's chest. Where the hand touched the green turned black. Smoke rose from the contact. The green man groaned. It was a sound of deep pain. It sounded like a forest fire, but Someshta did not fall. He grabbed Balthamel in a bear hug. He wrapped his massive arms around the leather-clad figure. He lifted him off the ground. It was a battle of opposites, life against death. Someshta was pouring all of his life force into the Forsaken. He was trying to crush him with the power of growth. Vines grew rapidly over Balthamel's body. They wrapped around his neck and his arms. They tried to squeeze the life out of him. But Balthamel was fighting back with the power of decay. Black spots appeared on the green man's back. Leaves fell from his body in a shower of brown confetti. The smell of burning wood filled the air. While they struggled, Aginor turned his attention to the group. He did not care about the green man. He left Balthamel to deal with the gardener. Aginor wanted something else. He looked at Rand and Matt and Perrin. He looked at them with a greedy intensity. He could sense the power in them. He could sense the Tavaren threads. But mostly he could sense the eye. He looked past them toward the pool. He started to walk toward them. "Run," Moiraine screamed. Her voice broke the trance of fear. "Run to the eye!" The group scattered. They did not know where to run, but they knew they had to get away from the walking corpse. Rand turned and ran up the slope. The ground was steep here. He scrambled over rocks and through bushes. He could hear the others running too. He heard Egwene gasping for breath. He heard Mat cursing. Behind them, the battle between the Green Man and Balthamel reached its end. There was a roar, a flash of blinding light, and then a sound like a thunderclap. Rand looked back for a second. He saw a pile of ashes where the Green Man had been, a pile of black ash and a few burning branches. But Balthamel was gone too. The Green Man had destroyed him. In his final moment, Someshta had used every drop of his life to consume the Forsaken. He had turned himself into a weapon of nature. Where the ashes lay, a single tiny flower was already blooming. A small white blossom in the middle of the destruction, the last gift of the Nym. But there was no time to mourn. Aginor was still coming, and Aginor was stronger. He was one of the scientists of the Shadow. He had created the Trollocs. He understood biology and the One Power better than anyone. He moved faster than an old man should. He floated over the ground. He did not walk. He glided. Moraine stopped. She turned to face him. She raised her staff. She embraced the source. A stream of fire shot from her staff toward Aginor. It was a massive bar of white flame. It was enough to melt stone, but Aginor just laughed. He raised his hand and swatted the fire away as if it was a fly. The fire dissipated into harmless sparks. He struck back. He did not use fire. He used a weave of air. He picked Moiraine up and threw her. She flew through the air like a doll. She hit a tree with a sickening crunch and slid to the ground. She did not move. Lan roared. The warder charged. He did not care about the odds. He saw his Aes Sedai fall, and he became a machine of death. He swung his sword at Aginor's neck. It was a perfect strike, fast and powerful. But Aginor did not even look at him. He just waved a finger. Lan was lifted off his feet. He was thrown backward. He crashed into a boulder and lay still. Now there was no one left to protect them. The boys were alone. Aginor looked at them. He smiled his broken smile. He said he needed them. He said he would use them. He needed someone who could touch the world to help him drain the eye. He pointed a claw at Rand. Rand felt a pulling sensation. It was not physical. It was inside his chest. It felt like a hook had been set in his heart, and someone was reeling him in. He tried to fight it. He dug his boots into the ground, but his feet slid across the grass. He was being dragged toward the Forsaken. He looked at the others. Mat and Perrin were on the ground clutching their heads. They were being held by the same power. Egwene and Nynaeve were unconscious. It was just Rand and the monster. Aginor spoke to him. He told Rand that he knew what he was. He told him that he could teach him. He said that with the power in the eye they could rule everything. He offered Rand power. But beneath the words there was only hunger. Aginor wanted to drain Rand dry. He wanted to use Rand as a straw to drink the power of the eye. Rand panicked. He did not know what to do. He reached for his sword, but he couldn't move his arms. The invisible ropes held him tight. He looked up the hill. The eye of the world was there, the pool of pure Saidin. He could feel it calling to him. It was a thrumming vibration in the air. It felt familiar. It felt like home. Suddenly the hold on him broke. Aginor looked surprised. He looked toward the eye. He realized that the eye itself was reacting. The pool was active. Aginor forgot about Rand for a second and ran toward the pool. He wanted to get there first. Rand scrambled to his feet. He did not run away. He ran after Aginor. It was instinct. He knew he could not let the Forsaken touch that pool. He ran up the hill. His lungs were burning. The heat was returning. With the Green Man dead, the sanctuary was failing. The white mist at the borders was thinning. The rot of the blight was creeping back in. The sky was turning grey again. The flowers were wilting. The paradise was dying. Rand reached the top of the hill. He saw the pool. It was glowing brightly now. The light inside it was swirling. It looked like liquid sun. Aginor was standing at the edge. The Forsaken was trembling. He was afraid, but he was also driven by a thirst that had lasted 3,000 years. He reached out his hands toward the liquid. Rand screamed at him to stop. He threw himself forward. He did not have a plan. He just wanted to stop the monster. He crashed into Aginor. They both fell, but they did not fall into the water. They fell on the edge. And then the world vanished. Rand was no longer on the hill. He was nowhere. He was everywhere. He felt a connection snap into place. It was a cord of light. It was thick and pulsing. It connected him to the pool. He gasped. It was a shock that went through every nerve in his body. It was not like the tainted Saidin he had touched before. This was not oily or sick. This was pure. It was clean. It was like drinking ice water on a hot day. It was like breathing pure oxygen. It rushed into him. It filled him up. It overflowed. He felt huge. He felt like a giant. He felt like he could reach up and touch the stars. He could see the whole world. The power was endless. It was sweet and terrible. He looked at Aginor. The Forsaken was also connected to the pool. He had a cord of his own. It was a black cord. He was trying to suck the power out. He was trying to take it all. He looked at Rand with shock. He had not expected Rand to be able to channel this much. He had thought Rand was just a novice. But Rand was not doing this with skill. He was doing it with instinct. He was a vessel that was being filled. They fought, but they did not fight with fists or swords. They fought with the power. Aginor tried to cut Rand off. He tried to block the flow. Rand pushed back. He did not know how he was doing it. He just willed it. He wanted the power. He needed it. He pushed more power through the cord. He drew deeply from the eye. Aginor's eyes went wide. He began to scream, but it was a silent scream. He had drawn too much. He was greedy. He had been starved for so long that he gorged himself. His body could not handle it. The pure Saidin was too strong for his rotted flesh. He began to burn, not with fire, but with light. The light poured out of his eyes and his mouth. His skin began to crack. He reached out to Rand, begging for help, but Rand could not stop. The power was rushing through him like a river. Aginor crumbled. He turned to dust. He blew away in the wind. The Forsaken was gone, destroyed by his own greed and the purity of the power he tried to steal. Rand was alone now, but he was not alone. The power was still with him. He was glowing. He stood up. He felt the cord connecting him to the eye. He felt another cord too, a dark, black cord that stretched off into the distance. It went north. It went toward the pit of doom. He could feel something at the other end of that black cord, something massive and evil. Balthamel, the Dark One, or the man who called himself the Dark One. Rand knew what he had to do. He did not think about it. The power guided him. He needed to use this energy. He could not hold it. If he held it, he would burn up like Aginor. He had to release it. He had to direct it. He thought of the battle at Tarwin's Gap. He knew that the Shienerans were dying there. He knew that the armies of the Trollocs were overwhelming them. He had heard the stories. He felt a need to help. He stepped forward. But he did not step on grass. He stepped on air. He walked up into the sky. The power carried him. The landscape blurred beneath him. He was moving faster than the wind. Then he was traveling without moving. He saw the world spread out below him like a map. He saw the blight. He saw the mountains. He saw the gap in the mountains where the men of Shienar were making their last stand. He saw the Trolloc army. It was a black ocean of monsters, thousands upon thousands of them. There were Fades riding among them. There were dreadlords channeling fire. The human soldiers were breaking. They were being slaughtered. The golden crane was falling again. Rand raised his hands. He felt the eye of the world pumping power into him. He struck. He did not use fire. He used the earth. He willed the ground to shake. The earth rippled under the Trolloc army. Massive cracks opened up. Thousands of Trollocs fell screaming into the darkness. He used the air. He summoned a wind that knocked them flat. He used the fire. He called down lightning from a clear sky. It struck the Fades. It turned them to ash. The soldiers of Shi'enar looked up in amazement. They saw a figure of light in the sky. They did not know who it was. They thought it was the Creator. They cheered. They rallied. They charged back into the fight. Rand watched as the tide turned. He watched the shadow retreat. He felt a fierce joy. He was doing this. He was saving them. But then the dark cord tugged at him. The presence at the other end was angry. Balthamel was there. He was waiting. Rand turned his attention to the enemy. He let the image of Tarwin's Gap fade. He found himself in a dark place, a room of shadows. Balthamel was there. He looked like a man made of fire and dried meat. His eyes were furnaces. He laughed at Rand. He told Rand it was futile. He told him that he had won a battle, but he would lose the war. Rand did not listen. He had a sword in his hand now, but it was not a steel sword. It was a sword made of light. It was pure compacted energy. He swung it. Balthamel parried with a staff of darkness. Light and dark clashed. Sparks flew that burned holes in reality. Rand focused on the black cord that connected Balthamel to the Dark One. He knew that was the source of his power. He had to cut it. He slashed at the cord. Balthamel screamed. He tried to stop him. He threw darkness at Rand. He showed him visions of his friends dying. He showed him his mother weeping. Rand ignored them. He poured everything he had into one strike. The sword of light sliced through the black cord. It severed it. There was a sound like a world breaking. Balthamel shrieked. It was a sound of pure agony. He was cut off from his source. He began to fade. The fire in his eyes went out. He dissolved into shadow. Rand stood alone in the dark. The power began to fade. The cord to the eye was growing thin. The pool was empty. He had used it all. He felt the exhaustion crashing down on him. He felt the light leaving him. He fell. He fell through the darkness. He fell back to the world. He woke up on the top of the hill. He was lying on the ground. His head was spinning. His body ached as if he had been beaten with hammers. He opened his eyes. The sky was blue. The sun was shining, but the air was different. It was not the magical spring of the Green Man anymore. It was just a normal day. The oppressive heat of the blight was gone, but the unnatural perfection of the sanctuary was gone too. He sat up slowly. He looked at the pool. The eye of the world was gone. The liquid light had vanished. The oval basin was dry. At the bottom of the basin lay the things that had been hidden. There was a chest made of crystal. It was clear and beautiful. Inside it lay a banner. It was white, with a symbol on it. A disc divided by a sinuous line, one half white and one half black. The ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai from the Age of Legends. And across it was the figure of a dragon in gold and red, the banner of light. Next to the banner was a horn. It was a simple, curved horn. It looked like it was made of gold, but it had a strange glow to it. Around the rim was an inscription in silver. The grave is Nobartum I call, the Horn of Valere. The horn that would summon the dead heroes to fight for the light. And under them lay the broken pieces of a seal, a round disc made of Quendilar heartstone. It was supposed to be indestructible, but it was broken. It was one of the seals on the Dark One's prison, and it was shattered. Rand stared at the objects. He felt cold. He knew what this meant. He knew what he had done. He had channeled. He was a man who could channel. He was one of the doomed. He was a hazard to everyone around him. He remembered the madness of the male Aes Sedai who broke the world. Was that his future? To go mad and kill the people he loved? He heard footsteps. He turned. Moiraine was climbing the hill. She looked battered. Her dress was torn and she walked with a limp. But she was alive. Lan was with her. He looked steady as always, though his face was bruised. Following them were the others: Egwene, Nynaeve, Perrin Mat, and Loyal. They were all alive. They looked at Rand with wide eyes. They had seen the light. They had felt the earth shake. Moiraine looked into the empty basin. She saw the horn and the banner and the broken seal. She looked at Rand. Her face was unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep and heavy sadness. She knew what this meant too. The prophecy was fulfilled. The dragon was reborn. The eye of the world had served its purpose. It was used up. Rand stood up. He backed away from them. He told them to stay back. He told them he was dangerous. He confessed. He said he had channeled. He said he had killed Aginor. He said he had destroyed the Trolloc army. He waited for them to run away. He waited for them to hate him. Egwene stepped forward. She did not look afraid. She looked at him with pity. She touched his arm. She said it didn't matter. She said he was still Rand. Mat and Perrin looked uncomfortable, but they did not run. They were his friends. They were from the Two Rivers. They did not abandon their own. Moiraine spoke then. Her voice was soft. She said that the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. She said they could not change what had happened. She confirmed it. He was the one they had been looking for. He was the Dragon Reborn. The wind blew across the hilltop. It was a cold wind. The protection of the Green Man was completely gone now. The Blight was still out there. It was quiet for now, beaten back by the release of the power, but it would return. The trees around the edge of the sanctuary were already starting to look sickly. The grass was turning yellow. Rand looked at the broken seal. He picked up a piece of it. It was hard and cold. He realized that the Dark One was not free yet, but his prison was weakening. The war was not over. It was just beginning. This was just the first battle. He looked at the horn of Valere, the legendary horn. Legend said that whoever blew it would summon the heroes of the ages. Arthur Hawkwing, Birgitta Silverbow. They would come back to fight. He wondered why the horn was here. Why was it hidden with the eye? Perhaps because the dragon would need it. They gathered the items, the crystal chest, the banner, the horn. They wrapped them carefully. These were the most precious things in the world. Wars would be fought over them. They had to get them back to safety. They had to get them to Faldara. The journey back would be hard, but different. They were not running blindly anymore. They were changed. They had faced the Forsaken and lived. They had seen the power of the ancients. They walked down the hill, leaving the empty pool behind. As they walked past the pile of ash that was once the Green Man Loyal, stopped. The Ogier was crying. He knelt down next to the small white flower that was blooming in the ash. He whispered a prayer in the Ogier tongue. He touched the ground gently. He took an acorn from his pocket and planted it next to the flower. He said that he would remember. He said the trees would remember. Someshta would not be forgotten. He was the last of his kind, and he died well. They left the sanctuary. The mist was gone. The transition back to the Blight was harsh. The smell of rot hit them immediately. But the worms were gone. The Trollocs were dead or scattered. The path was clear. They rode in silence. Rand rode a little apart from the others. He felt the distance growing between them. It was not a physical distance, it was the distance of secrets and fear. He looked at his hands. They looked the same as they always had, but he felt the difference under the skin. He felt the taint waiting for him. He had touched the pure source today, but he knew that next time he reached for the power, it would not be pure. It would be slick with oil. It would be heavy with the Dark One's touch. And eventually it would drive him mad. He looked at Moiraine. She was watching him. She had been searching for him for 20 years. Now she had found him. He wondered if she was his ally or his jailer. He wondered if she would kill him if he started to go mad. He realized that she probably would. And he realized that he wouldn't blame her. The sun began to set. The red light washed over the twisted trees of the Blight. It looked like blood. The first stand against the shadow was over. They had won. But it felt like a loss. The innocence of the boys from Emond's field died on that hill. They were part of the great game now. The wheel of time turned and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. This was the end of the first book of their lives. Part 2 ends here. The confrontation is over, the power has been unleashed, and the secrets have been revealed. The Green Man is dead, and the Eye is empty. The world has changed forever because the dragon has woken up. Part 3, the ageless pool and the first fire. The hill was quiet now. The terrible noise of the battle was gone. The screaming of the Forsaken was just a memory carried away by the wind. Rand sat on the edge of the empty basin. The stone was cool under his hand. Just minutes ago, this basin had been filled with liquid light. It had been filled with the pure power of the male half of the true source. Now it was just dry stone. It felt rough and ordinary. It was hard to believe that the destiny of the world had been contained in this small space for 3,000 years. Rand looked down at his hands. They were trembling. It was a fine tremor that he could not stop. He clenched his fists, but the shaking continued inside his bones. He felt hollow. The power had filled him up so completely that being without it felt like being starved. It was a physical ache. He felt lightheaded, as if he had not eaten for days. But there was something else too. There was a memory of the filth. Even though the power in the Eye was pure, the power he had touched to fight Baalzamon at the end had been tainted. He could still feel the oily residue of the Dark One on his mind. It made him want to scrub his skin until it was raw. The others were gathering around the items at the bottom of the basin. They moved slowly. The shock was still wearing off. They were like people walking in a dream. Matt reached out to touch the crystal chest, but he pulled his hand back before he made contact. He looked at Moiraine as if asking for permission. Moiraine nodded slowly. She looked older than she had this morning. The ageless quality of her Aes Sedai face was still there, but her eyes were weary. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, she seemed overwhelmed by the reality of it. They lifted the items out of the basin one by one. First was the horn of Valere. It was heavier than it looked. It was curved and golden, but up close you could see it was not normal gold. It had a depth to it. It seemed to glow with an inner light. Along the rim of the bell there was script in silver. It was the old tongue. Moiraine translated it quietly. The grave is no bar to my call. It was a chilling sentence. This horn had the power to break the rules of death. It could summon the heroes of the ages. Rand looked at it and wondered who would come if he blew it. Would they be angry to be woken up? Would they fight for him, or would they judge him? Next, they lifted out the banner of light. It was made of a strange material. It was soft like silk, but it felt stronger. It was white as new snow. In the center was the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai. The black and white disc, the colors were sharp and clear. They had not faded even after thousands of years. Across the disc was the dragon. It was red and gold. It was a creature of myth. It had scales and claws and a long tail. It looked fierce. This was the banner of Luz Therin Telemon, the man who broke the world, the man whose soul was now inside Rand. Rand looked at the banner and felt a wave of nausea. He did not want this banner. He did not want to be the dragon. He just wanted to be a shepherd. He wanted to tend sheep and harvest tobacco. But the banner lay there on the grass, accusing him. Finally, there was the seal. The broken pieces of the dark disc. Moiraine picked them up with a handkerchief. She treated them with extreme caution. This was Quendilar, Heartstone. It was a material made during the Age of Legends. It was supposed to be the hardest substance in existence. It was said that if you tried to break Heartstone, it would only get stronger. It absorbed force. You could hit it with a hammer or burn it with fire, and it would not scratch. Yet here it was broken. It had shattered like a clay plate. This was the most terrifying discovery of all. If the seals were made of Heartstone and the Heartstone was breaking, it meant the Dark One was touching the world directly. His prison was failing. The cracks in the seal matched the cracks in the world. Moiraine wrapped the pieces of the seal carefully. She placed them in her saddlebag. She placed the horn and the banner in the crystal chest, and then wrapped the chest in blankets. They strapped it to a pack horse. The horse shifted nervously. Even the animal seemed to sense the power of the objects it was carrying. They stood on the hill for a long time. No one wanted to leave the fading sanctuary, but they knew they had to. The Green Man was gone. Without his life force, the garden was dying rapidly. The leaves on the oak tree were turning brown and falling like rain. The grass was withering. The sweet smell of the flowers was being replaced by the smell of the blight. The rot was returning. If they stayed too long, they would be trapped here when the corruption took over completely. They mounted their horses. The animals were rested, but they were skittish. Rand climbed into the saddle of his bay horse. He felt clumsy. His muscles were stiff. He took one last look at the empty pool. He tried to memorize the place. This was where his life had ended and begun again. They rode down the hill. They passed the pile of ash that was Someshta. The single white flower and the acorn Loyal had planted were the only green things left in the clearing. Loyal bowed his head as they passed. He murmured a farewell to the ancient gardener. The Ogier took death very seriously. For a Nym to die was like a library burning down. It was a loss of knowledge and history that could never be replaced. They entered the mist. It was thin and wispy now. It did not provide the hard barrier it had before. They rode through it and emerged back into the blight. The heat hit them like a hammer. It was dry and dusty heat. The sky was a bruised purple color. The twisted trees were waiting for them. But something was different. The blight was quiet. Usually the blight was full of noise, screams and rustles and the clicking of insects. But today it was silent. It was a stunned silence. The release of the pure Saidin had sent a shockwave through the land. The power that Rand had wielded had been so immense that it had terrified even the monsters. The worms were gone. They had burrowed deep into the earth to hide. The Trollocs were dead or fled. The ravens were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the shadow was holding its breath. It had been burned, and it was licking its wounds. They rode south. They retraced their steps through the Pass of the Seven. The journey was easier this time without the pursuit of the worms, but it was harder on their minds. They were alone with their thoughts. The boys did not joke with each other. Perrin rode with his hand on his axe. He looked at Rand often. His yellow eyes were full of questions. He could smell the change in Rand. He could smell the tension and the fear. Matt rode hunched over. He was trying to pretend none of this was happening. He kept touching the dagger at his belt. The journey back to the border took several days. They camped in the open. They set wards, but they didn't really need them. Nothing came near them. The nights were long. Rand could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Balthamel. He saw the black cord being cut. He felt the sword of light in his hand. He wondered if he was already going mad. He tested his mind. He tried to remember the names of everyone in Emond's field. He tried to recite the list of sheep diseases. He wanted to make sure his mind was still his own. One night, Moiraine sat with him by the small fire. She did not say much. She just poured him tea. She told him that what he did was necessary. She told him that he saved Shianar. She tried to offer comfort, but Rand did not want comfort from an Aes Sedai. He asked her if she would gentle him. Gentling was what they did to male channelers. They cut them off from the one power forever. Men who were gentled usually lost the will to live and died within a year. Moiraine looked at him with her dark eyes. She said she would not gentle him, not yet. She said the world needed him. This was not the answer he wanted. He wanted to be told he was normal. He wanted to be told it was a mistake. But Moiraine never lied. She just gave hard truths. They crossed the border back into Shianar. The air changed again. The smell of rot faded and was replaced by the clean, cold scent of winter. The trees became normal again. They saw a patrol of Shienaran lancers. The soldiers rode up to them. They cheered when they saw the group. They had seen the battle in the sky. They told stories of a giant of light who had crushed the Trolloc army. They called it a miracle. They did not know the giant was the tired boy riding the bay horse in the middle of the group. Rand kept his head down. He pulled his cloak hood over his face. He did not want their praise. He felt like a fraud. They arrived back at Fal Dara. The fortress was buzzing with activity. The great hunt had been called. Lord Agelmar welcomed them back as heroes. He told them the details of the battle at Tarwin's Gap. It was a massacre, but in favor of the light. The Trollocs had been obliterated. The earth had swallowed them. Lightning had turned them to ash. Agelmar said the Creator himself must have intervened. Moiraine just smiled her mysterious Aes Sedai smile and said, "The light provides." They were given rooms and baths. Rand scrubbed the dirt of the blight off his skin, but he could not scrub off the feeling of the power. He looked in the mirror. His face looked the same. He had the same red hair and grey eyes, but something was different behind the eyes. There was a shadow there. A hardness that hadn't been there before he left the two rivers. He was a shepherd no longer. He was a weapon. That night, Moiraine gathered them. She explained what would happen next. The finding of the horn changed everything. The prophecy said the horn would be found just before the last battle. This meant the end times were coming. The days of peace were over. The final war against the shadow was beginning. They had to take the horn to Ilion. It was said the hunt for the horn would begin there. They had to keep it safe from the friends of the dark, who would surely come for it. She looked at the boys, at Rand, Matt, and Pera. She told them they were Tavaren. The pattern of the world wove around them. They could not escape their destiny. They could try to run, but the wheel would pull them back. Rand felt a surge of anger. He hated the wheel. He hated being a puppet. He wanted to cut his strings, but he remembered the feeling of the power, the seduction of it. Part of him wanted to touch it again. That terrified him more than anything. The script ends here with the closing of the first book. The eye of the world is gone. The dragon is revealed. The ancient heroes are waiting to be called. The seal is broken. As you drift off to sleep, think about the quiet after the storm. Think about the safety of the fortress walls. The wind howls outside, but inside the fire is warm. The story is paused. The characters are resting. And so should you. The wheel of time turns and ages, come and pass. But tonight, the turning stops for you. Good night.